Yeah, this is my book,
Hmm.
Opioid Reckoning. So this project was 10 years in the making and really began with a personal experience with my own daughter, and my shock at discovering that she was addicted to heroin. And I get into some of that in the book, but what it ended up doing for me was colliding with my own research as a historian. I'm a professor at McAllister, and I use oral history with my projects, and so I do more recent history or things that are kind of like going on now, to preserve stories for the future. And so when I started learning, and I also teach history of medicine, and women's history. So everything just kind of, and the history of childhood. So I had been like studying all this for years, and then there in my own home was this problem I had not seen. So I was shocked, and I ended up interviewing 60 something people, and I ended up writing a book, with the encouragement of an editor at the University of Minnesota Press who saw my little McAllister website blurb. So there's about 25 people who appear in the book, but the main thing I learned was that things are changing in addiction treatment. I learned the whole history of addiction treatment, that Minnesota is like the epicenter, that it is primarily based here and in the United States in a 12-step program, and that opioids and opioid addiction was not working because people were dying of overdoses, and then particularly when fentanyl comes on the scene. So the other things I've learned is, and I learned this kind of experientially, but also by interviewing people, is the intensity of stigma and the layers of stigma there's so much stigma that we often can't see it, because it's like, I don't know, I remember things about, like, patriarchy, teaching women's studies. Oh, patriarchy, you don't even realize what you're it's just, we're just in it. And so once you start to see those things, you can't unsee it. That and language is also really important to me. So Mickey, for this issue, I would like to just recommend that you never use the word addict, unless another person speaks of themselves as saying, I see myself as an addict. It's like calling a person with cancer a cancer who has cancer. I would also tend towards using some of the more medical words like substance use disorders. So supervised injection sites are really hot. They're on the scene more than they've been in 30 years. And they save people's lives. But the term supervised injection site is just, people hear it and they're like, you've got to be kidding me. I thought this was illegal. So I've heard some people say it should be an overdose prevention center. Like, do you see the total? It just totally shifts our perspective on something. You'll hear families say, and mostly white families, you'll hear them say, well, we were just a normal family. Or, you'll hear people in certain organizations that'll go unnamed say, you just need to have dinner with your kids every night and get them in sports. Because there's this external pressure on, like, parents, that we are somehow all powerful beings who can control everything that our children encounter in the world. So parents stigmatize other parents in judgment, right? Well, you're not, the problem is you're not doing a good job. Or you'll hear things like, they love their drugs so much that they're willing to be homeless. That's another one. So those kinds of like phrases that other people is one kind of cultural stigma. The other would be institutional stigma and the way that morality plays into treatment models. and that if you can't, if the 12-step program doesn't help you, it's because you're not working it hard enough. So the pressure on a person to follow a model that isn't working because they don't see that there's any other way. These are things I include in stigma, because it's any moment where we separate ourselves from that person. The whole NIMBY thing about mental health and methadone clinics the drug that was invented in the 60s by a woman. She didn't invent the drug. She discovered that methadone, the painkiller, could be used to help people stabilize. Marie Neiswander. So methadone, where was there a problem in the 60s? It was in New York City. It was in Philadelphia. It was in communities of color. And that treatment became associated with communities of color and got completely separated from where most white people who weren't got their treatment. They went away to Hazelden. They went away to, so we got this racial separation too. So people of color are much more stigmatized than white people on this. And that's been the shock of the opioid epidemic, right? Oh my God, suburban kids are dying. And I'm not saying that with no empathy for those families, because I interviewed a lot of them. But I'm saying the culture, the broader American racialized hierarchy, shock and horror, right? Oh, now we're going to pay attention to this. You know, there's a lot of examples in my book, you know, thinking about, okay, one is a doctor who was prescribing Suboxone, which is another drug that was invented actually in 2011. That's become very successful for a lot of people. This young man, Spencer, had a urinalysis that came up positive, and the doctor kicked him off of the program and said, come back in a year. And you know, Spencer died. He's not with us anymore. And so I think there's just there's so many little examples, and it's in part because we don't treat people who are seeking help for a drug addiction with empathy. We treat them with judgment and scorn. And I guess one of the whole premises that I would say about stigma is we can fight it with empathy. If we just were empathetic in the ER with the people who come in, instead of being frustrated, oh, there's that guy again who's had 5 overdoses in the last month. If we found some ways to insert empathy in those situations, it could reduce the institutionalized, and I think that the personal levels of stigma. I teach a class called Uses and Abuses, and it's the history of drugs, addiction, and recovery. And my student, one of the books is a book about drugs called I don't have it. It's called Buzzed, but it was written by some pharmacologists about all the different drugs. And my student, I have them read that all along the semester, and they're like, I wish I'd had this in high school. The problem is we don't think children are doing the things that they're actually doing, because we want to have these blinders on as parents. And so that gets spread in the school board, and then you get the extreme people who don't want any education in an educational setting. So this is a huge problem. But I think if more kids knew the consequences of binge drinking, if they knew the consequences of smoking too much marijuana before their brain was fully developed, if they understood it, and if they were treated just like harm reduction, if they were treated with respect and not fear, and just said, don't do it. You don't tell a teenager not to do it. That's like telling your toddler not to touch the hot stove. So I really think there could be incredible inroads made on education.